September 1995, the PlayStation is currently making its early rounds in Europe and the United States. French game designer Michel Ancel over at Ubisoft has just released Rayman for the Atari Jaguar and the PlayStation 1. A 2D platformer that captivated audiences internationally with its gorgeous visuals, music, and gameplay. Nowadays, Rayman 1 is seen as that game everyone loves to look at, but not really play due to its extreme difficulty spikes. Regardless, it was a massive hit, being ported to both the Sega Saturn and PC with tons of different versions and expansions, most of which were relegated to Europe only. A sequel was obviously going to be in the works that would take the cutesy nature and inject a bit of darkness into it. This is the subject of today's video. Rayman 2: The Great Escape, one of the greatest 3D platformers ever made. Originally on the Nintendo 64 in 1999 and ported to as many platforms as you can count later on, Rayman 2 was at the time one of the most well-animated, best controlling, and best looking games on the market. To understand its impact and why it still holds up even today, we're going to be looking at its development history, its unique characteristics from other games in the oversaturated genre at the time, and the legacy it left behind. I'll also be giving my personal perspective and opinions on the game, as it was one of the first games I ever played as a very young child. Originally, Rayman 2 was going to be a direct sequel stylistically to the original game, a strictly 2D adventure that would use pre-rendered sprites much similar to games like Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, albeit with a lot more graphical finesse. A prototype level of this stage of development is actually fully playable in the PlayStation 1 version of Rayman 2 as a special stage. In my research, it was hard to find an official reason for the pivot to 3D, but if I were to speculate, 1996, the year after the original game's launch, would bring us Super Mario 64, a game that was setting the standard for most franchises looking to bring their games into the 3D age. On top of that, you had the original Crash Bandicoot, which, while not standard setting, still was a massively impressive graphical showcase for the PlayStation 1's 3D capabilities. My guess is that they would think that the sequel would be overshadowed by the massive 3D platforming releases coming out in this modern era, and decided to go back to the drawing board and begin development as a new 3D platformer. With this new dimension came a new look for Rayman's world as a whole, inspired by Studio Ghibli films and the wacky world of Tex Avery cartoons. A concept reel was made for E3 1998 called Rayman's Training to illustrate the new aesthetic the game was going for. For the longest time, this clip was lost media until March 2022, when it was uploaded to YouTube, albeit without sound. At the same time as Rayman 2's initial 3D conceptualization, the same team would begin development on a game known as Tonic Trouble, a 3D platformer with a very similar tone to Rayman as a whole. The game was developed as a way for the developers to feel more comfortable developing in a 3D space, as well as to test the waters for mechanics and animation techniques that would be used in Rayman 2. I actually played Tonic Trouble for this video for research purposes, and it's a cute little 3D platformer. It's a little unfocused structurally, and being on the Nintendo 64, it suffers from a variable frame rate that chugs at points, but as a prototype to Rayman 2, I found it super interesting. The main character, Ed, would appear in other Rayman media as an Easter egg, and Rayman himself appears as a texture in the opening stage of Tonic Trouble. The game would progress through development until it released in 1999 as a timed exclusive for the Nintendo 64, where it became a massive hit. Following its initial Nintendo 64 release, it would see ports to PlayStation 1, PC, and Sega Dreamcast. Although something that comes up in discussion of Rayman 2 is the amount of ports it received and how they all vary from each other. This is a big can of worms, so buckle up. The original Nintendo 64 release is the game in its entirety with no cut content, but does have its own exclusive soundtrack using the Nintendo 64 sound chip. The PlayStation 1 version is a heavily compromised version with worse visuals and loads of cut content from the original Nintendo 64 release, but also introduces an amazing CD quality mix of the soundtrack. The Sega Dreamcast version is the original game in its entirety with the CD quality audio of the PlayStation version, super high quality textures, and a smooth 60 FPS frame rate. The Dreamcast version is often considered the definitive version for these reasons. However, this was just the game's initial ports at the time of its release, as there's more where that came from as we move into the 2000s. Let's start getting into Rayman 2 itself as a game, because holy cow. In the sea of 3D collectathons that were everywhere in this generation of gaming, Rayman 2 manages to branch out tremendously with its superb, linear yet always exciting structure, while never staying away from what makes the game so great. In every level there's something new, something fun, and always leaves you wanting more. This is on top of its controls that are damn near perfection. Rayman controls so gracefully that it puts its contemporaries to shame, especially in today's age. It doesn't feel like you have to adapt to this era of gaming's jank to enjoy it, because its controls have transitioned so well into the modern day. Going back to structure, this game's progression is level by level, but still offers up so many unique and memorable environments, challenges, and level design that rewards those for going off the beaten path. Aesthetically speaking, this is my favorite looking game of this era. Every design, character, environment all feels catered to the low poly count of the Nintendo 64, so nothing feels as if it's been compromised to fit within system limitations. This world feels alive, beautiful even, and to achieve that on something like this era of hardware is unheard of. To top it off, the soundtrack is phenomenal and adds so much atmosphere to a game that's already drenched in wonderful atmosphere visually. Rayman 2 stands out from its contemporaries at the time because of all this, but mainly its gameplay structure. You had great 3D platformers with great aesthetics and character already, however Rayman 2's linear style of progression keeps it from being yet another 3D collectathon. It does have moments where quotas for lums are needed to progress, though with the way levels are built, it'd be hard not to meet those on your first try. The game is surprisingly beefy for the structure it goes for. There's a lot of levels in the game, and they all feel super unique. The world of Rayman 2 itself is so drenched in great character moments and animations. Sure, it's pretty dry when compared to games nowadays, but everyone is so expressive and shows exactly what they're feeling through their expressions. A lot of animation in this game that was done is top-notch and is always brimming with character and life. When talking about the overall legacy of Rayman 2, it's often cited as one of the best games publisher Ubisoft has ever put out, and its design philosophies can be felt in more of their games like Beyond Good and Evil, and even some non-Ubisoft games like Crash to Insanity. Sadly, this is the only mainline entry in the Rayman series that had ever had this much atmospheric depth. While its sequel, Rayman 3, was a fantastic game in its own right, it's definitely a massive tone shift, both aesthetically and mood-wise, opting for more comedic moments and wackier scenarios. It isn't a bad thing, but the world and style of Rayman 2 has yet to really be replicated within the series itself, or elsewhere. It doesn't help that the series itself is now dormant, and when a new game comes up, it's usually part of the beloved and awesome UbiArt lineup like Origins and Legends. This game, however, has an extremely strong following, one that yearns to see this world and characters be presented in this form again. With a game as legendary as Rayman 2, it's easy to see why. Who knows, maybe a delicious Rayman 4 will come out sometime in the future, and we'll have Rayman's escapades in the Glade of Dreams continue at that point. But for now, all we have is this beautiful, weird, wonderful game that everyone should play at least once. It could not be understated how great and important of a game Rayman 2 is to a lot of people. And in the great pantheon of 3D platform revivals happening this day and age, it would be a shame not to see it brought back in some shape or form. Hopefully one day we'll see our limbless hero spring back into another 3D adventure, or maybe take us back to one we've come to love and miss for so many years. I'm John, otherwise known as Fupasayan from Super Igloo Ramen, and this has been my trip into the wacky, weird, beautiful world of Rayman 2. Thanks for watching.